to another edition of the Best Business Minds, where we interview business leaders and academics who write thought provoking books. I'm Marc Kramer, a serial entrepreneur who consults with family businesses and entrepreneurs. And currently, I'm teaching entrepreneurship at Vinh University in Hanoi, Vietnam. Today, please welcome Lorraine Marchand, author of the book No Fear, No Failure: Five Principles for Sustaining Growth Through Innovation. And Lorraine is a former the Best Business Minds Book Award winner. And I'm thrilled to have her. And also, she's from the Philadelphia area where I normally hail from. So, Lorraine, welcome.
Thank you, Mark. It's a pleasure to be here, particularly you in Vietnam and me in Philadelphia. I love it.
Yeah, it's amazing how technology has allowed us to connect. So, Lorraine, why don't you tell the audience about your background, like how you got to where you're at right now?
Sure. So I believe that many of us have several careers in our lives and they follow different arcs. So my first career was established when I was looking to solve the problem of how to have clinical research, the infrastructure, the operations really enhanced so that we could get more advanced therapeutics to patients faster. And that took me to companies like Bristol Myers Squibb, LabCorp, Covance, IBM Watson Health. Alongside that, I made a lot of mistakes along the way as both an entrepreneur in large organizations and an entrepreneur, because I've founded and co-founded 4 companies. And I decided that I wanted to share my learnings. And so that created the second arc, which was my foray into education. And I've taught at Columbia Business School, Princeton University, Moravian University, the Wharton School. And so I really just enjoy sharing my professional accomplishments as well as failures, which we're going to talk about today, so that others don't have to make the same mistake. And then kind of the third piece started about 5 years ago when I had a colleague who told me that I had amassed so much great content for my students that I should write a book. And COVID hit, and I had time to write a book. And I contacted who now is my good friend and colleague, John Hance. I had taken a memoir writing class from him at Harvard. And I asked if, he wanted to be my partner and help me with that first foray, and found that I really have loved it. And so talking with other individuals as the first book came out, finding out what's on their mind, having an opportunity to interview additional CEOs and really get under this theme of failure has been a fascinating research and practical experience as well.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the book, and I did think it was very practical and actually good for college students as well. So let's jump into fear of failure and the 5 C's lessons from the rise and fall of the IBM Watson Health. Your story about IBM Watson's Health is fascinating. What did the experience teach you about how fear, especially fear of failure, spreads inside large organizations?
Yeah, so what I've observed at IBM and other large organizations is that fear is almost like one of those, those chia plants that keeps growing, that you water and it just keeps expanding. And what happens is, once the fear is existing, particularly among a leadership team, it has a way of spreading. And so the work becomes how to hide the things that are going wrong. And the more you try to hide the things that are going wrong, the more things continue to build and go wrong. So it has this self-perpetuating aspect to it. And the other thing that I observed, I guess it's sort of a compensatory behavior, is that it helps to create this wishful thinking. And so rather than really grapple with the facts of what's not going well and continuing to propagate this lie from these fears, individuals also tell themselves that everything is going to be all right. And so I think it's this wishful thinking, along with continuing to try to hide all the signs and symptoms of the fear, is what starts to plague and spread across large organizations. And then it can be really hard to tamp it down.
Is that why, when I'm now almost 65, but let's say 30 years ago, everybody knew IBM and everybody wanted to work for IBM. And for a good 40 years before that, IBM was the technology name. And now nobody talks about IBM. I have students who have no idea who IBM is, even though it's still a very large company. I guess it's like maybe 30, $40 billion in revenue, but nobody talks about it anymore. And Sears no longer exists, Kodak no longer exists, all these brand names that we grew up with no longer exist. Is that because of this kind of fear? Is that what drives them into the ground?
Well, I think that the fear is an aspect of it, and then the fear gets coupled with an arrogance. And I think that that can really create obstacles in companies in terms of wanting to see the future, work with customers to create the future. You know, you look at companies like Blockbuster and Nokia and Borders, and they just refuse to look at the signs and symptoms that were in front of them, stay current with technology, keep up with their customers, and an arrogance set in, and they didn't believe that they needed to change. You see other companies that are the opposite of that. I love the story of an Ecolab, also a 150-year-old company, and they're focused on sustainability, and they have 3,500 field engineers who were out every day with customers. And, you know, one of the terrific stories was that during COVID, they saw that people were lined up outside of hospitals. And so they were curious about that and asked why the patients had to stand outside. And it turns out that the hospital staff were waiting for sanitizing sprays to dry. And these sprays were taking 20 minutes to dry, so they couldn't let a new patient in. So, armed with that information, the Ecolab engineers went back to engineering, to research, and they required a faster drying spray. They had it out in the hospitals within a week and a half. And not only did they have very satisfied customers, but they grew a whole new revenue stream, and they have a new product that continues to exist outside of COVID and has been a wonderful incremental type of innovation in their field. So, you know, staying close to the customer and wanting to continue to foster new ideas, large companies can do it, but not everybody does. So I think IBM is possibly an example of that, although they are doing a lot in quantum. And I think once we have more knowledge and information and practical use cases about quantum, we'll probably hear a little bit more about IBM again. But, you know, clearly other big names in cloud and storage and servers have replaced their dominance in that industry.
Yeah, I mean, students don't talk about, oh my God, I love to work for IBM. Same with Dell Computer. You know, Michael Dell was a superstar in the 90s and maybe the early part of this century. And now you don't hear anybody talk about Dell, and it's still a very large, multi-billion-dollar international company. But I don't think they attract the very best and brightest to come to either of those companies. And how Sears blew their big lead. I mean, they were the Amazon before Amazon for over 100 years and blew that opportunity. So let's take a look at some of the other things that you talk about in your book, which was quite interesting. Why do smart, capable teams often fail to adopt a customer service, customer first mindset, even when the stakes are high?
Well, I think that particularly in large organizations, it's very easy to default to what I call inside out thinking. So, you know, we go back into our organization, we're thinking about our goals and objectives, what we want to accomplish. And if the customer says something that isn't in alignment with our plans, a lot of times we're dismissive of it. And we use the insular type of thinking in order to give us the justification to continue to move forward. So there's that bias, I think, that occurs when you hear something from a customer and it's not aligned with the internal view and the planning. I think the other thing that happens is we just fail to ask the customer the right question. I like to tell my students that the sixth question of the most powerful questions is, what do you think of my idea? And instead of making that question number six, too often we make that question number one. And without any context or background, it's easy for a customer to tell you that they like your idea. A lot of times people don't want to hurt your feelings, but that's not really the question that you need to be asking. You need to understand what work the customer does, why they do what they do, what's working about it, what's not, where those pain points are, what they've tried to solve that problem that hasn't worked. And the very last question that you ask after you've developed a solution based on these answers to the pain points of the customer is, does this fit your needs? So I think that we just kind of default back to this kind of mindset.
Um, what surprised you most about the disconnect between Watson's technical brilliance and its ability to deliver customer value, especially when those guys were a machine for turning out patents?
Well, I think that the Jeopardy case in particular was a lot of fun. It gave a lot of excitement to this idea of advanced analytics, or what has moved on to become AI and its applications. And the CEO for IBM at the time was very bullish on the technology and wanted to lead, and thought that it would be easy enough to extrapolate the Jeopardy algorithm, for example, into cancer diagnostics. And so a lot of money was spent on the co-creation of a predictive cancer diagnostic with MD Anderson. They sunk about $62 million into it, only to find out that they were so focused on the technical aspects and bringing this product to market that, again, this idea of sitting with the customer, understanding their problems, observing their processes, their workflows, how the data was stored, that didn't occur. And so this really important area of customer discovery was completely missing. And then I also believe that IBM Watson Health became a little bit too convinced of its own ambition and its wherewithal in the technology of the advanced analytics, and didn't understand that the AI really wasn't at the same sophisticated level that it needed to be in order to be able to peruse health records and make some of these predictions. So it's a situation where there was inadequate customer discovery, and the ambition about the technology and bringing something new to market outpaced the execution of being able to do this effectively.
In chapter two, you argue that most leaders don't truly understand their customer. What's the most common blind spot you see?
Well, I think it's that we want to automatically jump to asking the customer what they think of our solution because we've got a lot invested in it. Obviously, we like it and we have a bias, and so we go out and we phrase things in such a way that we ask them what they think of it. And a lot of times we lead them into saying positive things about it. And if we were to go back to really understanding the customer, spending some time in ethnographic research, if you will, observing them in their natural habitat, doing what they do, then we would really learn so much more about the problem, because sometimes the way the customer describes the problem doesn't even truly align with the way that problem is presenting itself in real situations. So sometimes the customer isn't even completely aware of the problem. So I think it's that sometimes we have a blind spot to truly understand the customer's problem by observing it is where we have a blind spot, and we want to jump too quickly, as humans do, into solutions and into justification that our solution's going to work. And that wishful thinking consistently gets us in trouble. And I would say that among the startups that I advise, I know that you do this too, Mark. I would say 85% of the time, I'm talking to a team that has already fallen in love with its solution. And the technology is leading them and leading the discussion, and it's only out there when they're trying to sell it that they're realizing that they haven't done an adequate amount of customer discovery, and a lot of times they have to go back to the starting blocks because they've got to revamp their solution around customer need. That happens a lot.
Oh, yeah. And you tell them, even when they're making their presentation, don't spend three slides. going into such great detail about your technology that the only thing they care about is it actually works at the end of the day.
Well, and I like to add that a customer is willing to pay for it.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And that's funny. I just had this class today in my Agile Innovation class and said, if they're not willing to pay for it, you have nothing at the end of the day. Because I've learned that myself, building things that people just wouldn't pay for. It was solving a problem, it made logical sense. And yet when you went to them and they were like, yeah, that's nice, but I don't really care to have this problem solved.
And you run into that. People are resistant. They like the default, which is to do things the way they're currently doing them. So, that's why I always tell my students that they need to come up with at least three solutions. One, they've already fallen in love with and they have a bias around. Two is going to be the default because sometimes the customer wants to keep doing what they're doing and not solve the problem. And then three is often where the magic happens because you open the aperture, you think about things more creatively, you ask the right kinds of questions, and oftentimes the better solution is going to occur in that third opportunity. So it's important to have three.
I agree with you. You introduced six killer questions for customers. Which one tends to reveal the biggest insights?
The one that reveals the biggest insights is definitely after you've observed the problem that the customer is experiencing, really understanding where the specific pain point is and what they have done to try to remedy that situation. So it's really important to know what the customer is struggling with and what they have already done to solve their problem so that you can try to figure out where is some new territory to explore.
Can you share a story where customer discovery completely shifted the direction of an innovation?
Yeah, so I come out of the biopharma industry, and a couple of years ago, we were working with a gene therapy company, and they had a gene therapy for a rare eye disease. And again, with this inside out kind of insular thinking, they had decided that ophthalmologists would be prescribing their gene therapy intervention at the very first stage. Like, who wouldn't want to try a brand new gene therapy? If the gene therapy works, you're going to completely eradicate the eye disease. And so they assumed that physicians were going to want to use it what we might call first line. This would be their first line choice of an intervention. And they designed the clinical trials all around this first line use case, regulatory, et cetera. And they brought us in. I was doing some consulting work for them. And we did panels of interviews with physicians around the globe. And consistently, what we found out is that actually the ophthalmologist would prescribe the gene therapy as a last resort. Only after everything else that was standard of care and already in the armamentarium and already approved and understood had been tried, they would only use the gene therapy as a last resort. So a huge gap between the revenue that they thought they were going to achieve by having this as a first line treatment versus the revenue that was going to be coming in if this was a last line treatment. In this case, maybe the sixth thing that a physician tried. So that encouraged them to completely revamp their clinical trials, their market, their commercialization approach. They still went to market with the drug, but they realized that they were going to have to prove that it worked with these much more ill patients before they were going to be able to convince doctors to use it earlier.
What did it take from the C-suite to be agreeable to this? Because it could have gone the other way.
Well, that's very true. Fortunately, in this gene therapy company, which was early stage, they had a very well-heeled ophthalmic leader who had been in a number of failed startups and so was very tuned in, I would say, to where the gaps were in their program and to listening to his leadership. So I think they were fortunate that they had a leader who had had some trips and falls and knew how to pivot and was open-minded about this information. Because you're exactly right. I've also worked in big pharma companies where that kind of information is swept under the carpet, and leaders don't want to hear that, and they continue to move forward with their therapy only to get into phase 3 or get into the market and find out that they don't have any customers for it.
Do you find the entrepreneurial companies where money is tight, that they're much more open to making that kind of course correction?
Well, I think that the best innovation comes out of constraints. And, it's been proven that it's not about, armies of personnel and it's not about huge budgets. In fact, I would say that, the best innovations come out of reduced budgets, really good thinking coming together and working around those constraints. So, yes, I think that entrepreneurial companies that have more restrictions on their budgets, they have to be a lot more creative, they have to be more clever, they have to prioritize quickly, and they learn to become a lot more nimble and agile and move more quickly. We could say fail forward or fail fast or be students of intelligent failure, but that's definitely a way to advance innovation, is that kind of approach.
Um, why do organizations drift away from customer centricity as they grow, and how can they stop that drift?
Well, again, I think that as an organization continues to become very mature and established, they spend a lot of time developing processes, workflows, operating models, infrastructure that support a certain way of working. And a lot of times, what happens is the customer voice is not part of all of these very established infrastructure and operating models. And as soon as you aren't paying attention to the customer voice in very authentic ways on a day-to-day basis, continuing to bring in that information, that inside out, insular echo chamber kind of thinking is going to take over. That's going to be your default. And you're going to get very comfortable that you all know the best that there is to know about the product in the market. And you're going to start relying less and less on what the customer is telling you. So it kind of goes hand in hand with the infrastructure that comes along with a bureaucracy.
You're right that culture determines whether innovation sinks or swims. What are the earliest warning signs of an anti-innovation culture?
Well, I think that there are systemic aspects to it, and there clearly are behavioral aspects to it. One of the first system aspects that you can look at is what is incentivized here. So our key performance indicators, our dashboard, is it about how many products that we launch? Is it about how much revenue that we bring in? Is it about revenue per head count? Because all of those kinds of metrics are really only looking at success. If you have metrics that are looking at things like,
Take some outside.
if you have, whereas a more innovative type of culture is going to include metrics that might look at the ability to, let's say, take 10% of that budget and invest it in innovations that you don't have any sure belief that they're going to work out. So that kind of gets us into the aspect of chance and that golden ratio. So there are systemic things that you can look at in terms of what we're incenting. And then behaviorally, you can be in an environment where instead of reframing failure as relearning or continuous learning or the try, fail, learn mantra that I like to advocate, failure is part of the blame game. So there's finger pointing, people are avoiding it, they have a fear of saying when things don't work out. So those are some of the things that I think Marc that innovation culture. One of the things that I've did in organizations that I've worked at in the past was just implement something really simple that I called Fail-Free Fridays, where I would convene my senior leadership team and we just spend 30 minutes talking about what wasn't working and just making it really safe and encouraging people to share what was worrying them, what wasn't going well. And a lot of times, the best ideas and solutions came from brainstorming with other peers and feeling really comfortable to have those kinds of discussions. So it's up to the leader to establish big metrics and big things that you can do and small things that you can do in order to support this experimentation mindset throughout the culture.
Yeah, I also think that when companies get dominated by finance types, because on the board there's so many finance people, and they think, this man or woman is run amok. We need to have tighter controls. And I always think that's the death knell of every company is when the finance people start taking over because don't want to spend the money on innovation. They don't like failure. Everything costs money to them. And that's why people leave those companies, become entrepreneurs, and then crush the people they used to work for.
Well, that's very true. And I'm a big believer in Sergey Brin's golden ratio 70-20-10. Google is a huge company, and Sergey was able to show that the 10% that was invested in true innovation 5 years later resulted in 70% of the company's growth and new revenues. So it's a great testimony to if you're willing to take that chance and make that investment, it can pay off. And I think the corollary to making the financial investment in innovation is also investing in your people. And again, the Ecolab example of the field force and giving them the latitude to identify problems and work with customers and bring their ideas back into the organization so that ideas are bubbling up from the field and from customer experiences. That's a really important component of innovation as well. So we've got to invest in our people, have them feel comfortable making mistakes and knowing that if we reframe the mistake as learning, then we're always moving forward.
If a mid-level manager feels stuck in a rigid culture, what's the first small change they can make to influence it?
Well, I think the first thing that they need to do is they need to make sure that they're very clear on the company's goals and objectives, what matters, what is the stance when it comes to voice of the customer, what is the stance when it comes to employees bringing ideas forward. And as they want to brainstorm new ideas, new ways of doing things, and they want to present them, they need to make sure that they're aligned with the current construct, because trying to have something that's brand new, where you don't have a good sense of goals and objectives and the way the company works, it's probably not going to be successful. But if you can make sure that you're very thoughtful about existing systems, processes, imperatives, and you're bringing new ideas forward that kind of fit that construct, you're going to be a lot more successful getting some of your first ideas to be accepted. And then you can start to open the aperture and maybe try some newer things. And the other thing I think that a manager needs to do in a rigid culture, they need to be the champion. And even though that's really hard to do, if you think about the metaphor of a river guide, if a river guide is in the organization and they are implementing an innovation culture by the way they're working, the way they're interacting with their teams, they can be role modeling very positive behavior about being a leader of innovation, even if they're at a mid-level. So we all need to do our part to be champions of the culture. Some of us will be river guides and we'll be showing how the culture works, doing our jobs day to day. And other of us will be helmsmen at the helm of the ship. So whichever role you have, we all need to bring it upon ourselves to do the best job that we can to implement what I call that try, fail, learn mindset.
In a post-pandemic world where collaboration is often digital, how can companies rebuild trust and shared purpose?
Well, I think that we're seeing a situation now where people are looking for more personal connectivity. We have a lot of controversy, of course. I teach at the Wharton School, and, believe it or not, but my 19, 20-year-old students, they want to ban remote work. I think they've lived through COVID when they were in ninth and 10th grade and they had to participate in high school and they by a Zoom and they couldn't be in sports and so forth. And so they are really anti-technology only types of work interactions and very much advocates of trying to do things in person. And so I think we've got to get that healthy balance again. Technology has definitely allowed us to be global, to move faster, I mean, quicker. You and I wouldn't be having a conversation with 12-hour time difference if it wasn't for, the beauty of Zoom. But at the same time, we've got to stay connected. We've got to stay high touch. And I think in this era of AI, we've got to figure out what is the right balance between the human being part of the solution, the human plus the AI being part of the solution, and the AI being part of the solution themselves. So we've got to stay in connection with each other.
Excellent. You note that collaboration can dramatically increase revenue. What separates strategic collaboration from forced teamwork?
Yeah, that's a great question because I think a lot of times in organizations we pay a bit of lip service to the fact that we want people to work on teams, and so we force them together across functions or departments, and we maybe form cross-functional teams in order to solve a problem. And, the fact of the matter is that teamwork takes a lot of time to build the right kinds of relationships, get everyone aligned around the right kind of incentives in order to build trust. And so the difference with collaboration is when these departments and these service centers and different stakeholders all come together with a common set of shared objectives, understanding the needs of the customer, understanding the needs of the organization, and they all have incentives of how this is going to benefit the organization and benefit their department. And when they can come together around a shared set of objectives and the customer, the evidence is that revenues can grow exponentially because now maybe you've got a product department that's collaborating with the service department. So now the customer is getting a product with a service wrapper. Maybe the legal team has come forward with ways to ease the contracting process, and that can make the customer much happier and get things off the ground faster. Maybe accounting has figured out a way to streamline invoicing and put the invoicing on one document. I actually had that come up when I was working for a company and we were trying to do a lot of cross-department collaboration. And I didn't even realize that the client was getting 10 different invoices on a monthly basis. So we were all doing our thing, providing different services and products to the customer and making it absolutely miserable for her because she had to go through 10 different invoices. So when you collaborate, you have to think about those aspects too, the administrative, the back office pieces of it, and how all of that is coming together in order to solve your client's needs and pain points.
Can you give an example of a cross-functional collaboration that fundamentally changed that organization?
Well, I really like the story of AMD. So obviously a huge data center company, one of the biggest ones, and a story that a woman named Terry, she was the marketing and sales leader at AMD. She's now at Gartner, shared with me. And it was around a time when the company had developed a 64-bit chip that they were going to be selling to IBM for its servers. The only problem was there were no operating systems that needed the 64-bit chip. And so what Terry did was construct what I consider a master class in partnership and collaboration because she teamed up with the big software manufacturers, SUSE in Germany, Red Hat, Microsoft, got them together to incentivize them to create a 64 a operating system that required the 64-bit chip so that there was going to be demand for this chip. And the way that worked out, as she was very successful, is that their stock quintupled in about 18 months before Intel finally caught up and was able to release its 64-bit chip. So when you get the right kind of collaborators together around a problem and you are humble enough to know that you can't go it alone, because I think particularly in the fast moving field of software, nobody can go it alone. No one person or no one company has all the answers. And that if you're going to get to the best solution faster, you have to collaborate. You've got to work with other stakeholders that have complementary skills and viewpoints and products and services in order to create really new market shaping solutions.
In chapter 5, you describe change as a muscle. What daily habits help organizations strengthen that muscle?
Well, again, what you can do on a practical basis around change, the first thing is I think it's important to focus on what is not changing. So, as I would go through change initiatives with my team, a lot of times what I would do is focus on the things that weren't changing in order to get everybody calmed down, grounded, and then we could start to dissect the things that were going to change, right? Because not everything is changing in one big fell swoop. Maybe 20% of what you're doing is changing, or 30% what is changing. But rather than having everybody focus on what's changing or new, let's focus on what's staying the same so that we can have a better mindset to absorb that change. Along with that, I think it's really important in change initiatives that you delete something first. And a very brilliant software product lead, shared that with me, that teams have a hard time prioritizing when the new shiny object comes onto the table. How do they reprioritize all the other things that they're supposed to be doing or all the other fabulous innovative projects that they're working on? So help the team with that. Reprioritize, take something off the plate in order to make room for the new thing. I think that's a really hard one for organizations to accept, but it's absolutely fundamental because in a situation of change, not everything can be equivalent, not everything can take your time. So you've got to make that reprioritization scheme, for others so that they can make those decisions for themselves.
Why do some startups, this is a other question I wanted to ask you. What are the biggest myths leaders still believe about collaboration?
Well, I think that sometimes collaboration is still seen more as a behavior. So you talked about this forced teamwork that, if we get people in the room, they're going to collaborate, they're going to coordinate, they're going to get along, and wonderful things are going to happen. And so we think about incenting it more as a behavior of getting along with your peers and, to some extent, acquiescing or developing a consensus approach to things when collaboration can be so much more. It truly is a strategic business imperative, whereas I described in the example with AMD, you're thinking about a problem that's out there a little bit beyond the horizon. You're thinking about the customer's perspective, and you're really bringing the right products, services, solutions to bear in order to solve that problem. You're growing revenue, you're creating happier customers. So collaboration should result in products, services, business units coming together and revenues growing and people really feeling in lockstep around the objectives of the organization and what it is they're trying to improve for the customer, the better solution that they're bringing forward.
So I have a question from the audience. You place strong emphasis on customer experience as a core part of the business. However, improving customer experience often comes with added cost. What advice would you give a businesses? What advice would you give to businesses, especially early stage entrepreneurial ones, with limited budgets on how they can still enhance their customer experience to generate growth?
Well, So the question is, how do you continue to enhance customer experience when you're on a limited budget? So
Correct.
I'm assuming that this individual is suggesting that the enhanced customer experience is requiring adding new functionality, creating new benefits around their product service. So it basically causes investment in the roadmap. I think that's probably what they're saying. So I think if you have to invest in the roadmap in order to enhance the customer experience, a couple things that you can do. Are there other things about the product or the service that you don't need to keep investing in? So this idea of delete something first, is everything critical from a customer experience perspective, or could you start to make some trade-offs where you could save budget in certain areas in order to enhance the experience in other areas? I guess that would be one of the first things that I would look at. And then the other thing I would look at is, in the spirit of collaboration, are there other stakeholders that you could partner with or bring in that might be able to enrich the customer experience? And it's a win-win because maybe there's some part of the revenue or that they can also benefit from. So I would probably think about how I could shift budget in order to make sure I'm enhancing what's most valuable to the customer, checking in with them. Do they still want some of the other attributes and functions of the product? And then also seeing if there was any kind of strategic partner or collaborator that could help to enhance the customer experience where it took some of that budget off of my balance sheet.
We always love questions from the audience, so I appreciate that question. What are some of the startups become rigid and bureaucratic faster than century-old companies? Why does that happen?
Why do some companies become rigid and bureaucratic
Yeah,
faster?
why do some startups become rigid and bureaucratic faster than central companies? I mean,
Yeah.
I kind of think when boards bring in people from large corporations, that they
Mhm.
start building large corporation infrastructure.
Yeah,
That's
I agree
been
with.
my opinion.
Yes, I mean that's actually, in my opinion too, my number one observation. And again, because I've come out of healthcare and biopharma, it can be the case where we've got a startup. There are investors who believe in the startup. Maybe a founder has gotten it to a certain status, and they decide that they need a professional management team. So they bring a professional management team. They decide that they want a, big name pharma team because that's going to continue to help them attract big dollars from investors. And what they do is they bring that bureaucratic mindset out of a large company and they move it into the startup. And before you know it, we're not acting nimbly, just sitting together making decisions over pizza, like my friend Lawrence Blumberg advocates when he's been in a number of startups, but we start over engineering things and we put together stage gate processes and boards and governance. And pretty soon, everything has so many different steps and layers that we're not just kind of figuring it out together anymore. So I think that's absolutely one of the key things that occurs. And then I think it gets back to this idea of inside out thinking. We stop talking to our customers. We stop listening to what it is they really want, particularly if we don't agree with it and we're already down a path. Like the gene therapy company could have really gone awry if they didn't want to listen to the ophthalmic physicians who were saying they were not going to use this first line. They really could have propagated some difficulty for themselves. So those are two of the things that come to my mind too, Mark.
When interviewing candidates, how can leaders detect genuine adaptability?
Well, I think that it's great to ask individuals questions that put them in a situation where they can share a situation where maybe something rigid was occurring or was a problem that they were dealing with or something wasn't going as planned, and figure out what their approaches to creativity are. I have interviewed actually some innovators who use puzzles and case studies as part of their interview process. So they might ask that question about, all the different ways that you could measure barometer from the top of a building. I think that's one of those problems that are out there. So I think that there are case studies, puzzles, questions that you can ask that will get underneath whether somebody is really creative or whether they kind of stay to default thinking. I really like the advice that Spencer Rascoff gave when I interviewed him. Of course, he founded Zillow and Hotwire. And he said that one of his favorite questions to ask candidates is, if this doesn't work out and if you weren't doing this job, what would you do? And he said the really creative, innovative person who's passionate about their work says that, I would stay with this until I figured it out because, like, that's the kind of person that I am. And, another candidate might say, well, I'd go back to McKinsey or I'd go back to consulting or I'd go back to doing what I was doing. So, I think those kinds of questions can help to tease that out. And I would just say, since you're pausing and looking at another question, it's important that candidates have some say in this process as well. And I tell my students that the best question that they can ask when the interview's over and they get that softball question that says, "Oh, do you have any more questions for me?" And sometimes you might ask one more question about the job, or maybe you ask a benign question about what it's like to work here. I say no. What you should ask is, what is it like to fail here? What is the last time a project failed and what happened? How did the company adapt to that? What happened the last time somebody failed here? What happened to that person? So really be specific and ask them what happens when things don't work out here? What are the repercussions for people? What are the repercussions for teams? And what are the repercussions for projects? They're not going to be expecting that question, so you're going to get a really unvarnished answer, in my opinion, and you're going to get points for being insightful. But mostly, you're going to find out if that's the kind of company that you want to work for. Because if it's not safe to fail, if it's not an experimentation type of culture, you have to decide if that's right for you.
Yeah, I agree with that totally. I think that is one of the best pieces of advice that I also should be giving to my students because I give them a lot of advice and saying, don't just go to these interviews and when they ask you if you have any questions, uh, and you have nothing to contribute, that's also a way for them to see how much homework you've done or what kind of person they're going to get. So I think that's a great question. You mentioned that serendipity favors the prepared mind. What practices help individuals and companies stay prepared?
Well, I think that one of them is the practices within your company that are going to make you open to innovation. So it can be things like deciding that you are going to invest some of your dollars in innovation, right? You don't know if everything is going to work out, but chance favors the prepared mind. If you are prepared for some of the innovations to succeed or to lead to something, then you're going to have kind of a discovery oriented mindset. And it's likely that when something does work out, you're ready for it to happen. Another way that you can do that is to invest in people, give them the latitude to try new things, maybe to experiment, to fail if they need to, and be prepared if something that they're working on does work out. And, finally, I think that overarching mindset just means that you're just constantly looking for opportunities and you're never closing yourself off to the fact that the next thing that you try could actually work out. That quote is actually from Louis Pasteur, and it was a famous quote when he, developed the polio vaccine. And because he worked on it so diligently from so many different perspectives, when it finally panned out, that's when he fathered that quote.
What is the most counterintuitive lesson leaders need to learn about investing in chance?
Well, I think that far too many companies, and we've come out of the pharmaceutical industry, the healthcare industry. These are highly regulated industries, and people's lives are at stake. And so we might feel as though playing it safe is less risky, but the fact of the matter is playing it safe and being inactive in terms of risk is actually far more riskier. And if we're not changing, if we're not growing, if we're not trying new things, then that's going to lead to atrophy. And again, we need to look no further than Kodak and Nokia and Blockbuster to see how not staying open to innovation and is leading to atrophy, and that inactivity causes these companies to die. You named a number of them, right? Sears and others that have just failed to change and grow and learn, and that just has not had a good result for those companies.
I'm always talking about this with my students. I just can't get over the enormous leads that these companies had and squandered. Like you just wonder, how did they get to this point? But I often see that when the types of people that they appoint to these boards are typically people from very large companies, CEOs of large companies who like to play it safe themselves. And they're not knocking the ball out of the ballpark either, the people that they bring on the boards.
Well, that's true. And we know that corporations are designed to achieve shareholder value, and they can have a quarter to quarter mentality. I really enjoyed speaking with Maria Bolden, who had been an executive at DuPont. And she had lived through the days when DuPont was very innovative and very creative, working closely with the customer and bringing new products and services and ways of doing things to market. And then they had a leadership change and they became very quarter to quarter focused. Finance was basically running the company, and they started to falter. They didn't listen to the customer as much. They didn't take as many chances. And that's when the company started to
All this
stagnate.
chaos and opportunity along for the ride, right?
Excuse me, please make sure you're muted. Thank you.
Or
Okay.
go off mute and join the conversation.
All right. So I have a question here for you. Biotech startups face extreme scientific uncertainty and investor pressure for rapid milestones. How can a VC-funded biotech founders create the kind of innovation culture when their survival depends on hitting high-stakes regulatory, clinical, and fundraising milestones, where failure can mean the end of the company?
Well, that's very true. And as we just described, there is a lot of risk in biotech. And that risk is related to the fact that you've got regulatory hurdles, you've got patient safety, and those are certainly constraints that you need to work with. So I think the best thing to do is to lay out all those constraints, to do a risk assessment in terms of what's the likelihood of one of these things happening, and what is its impact going to be, right? So you can look at impact and you can also look at likelihood of it happening. And then once you've got that risk map, take a look at where you do have some latitude, right? Because you always have some areas where you can be creative or innovative within the scheme of your product development. So understand what's risky, what you can't touch, but then try to innovate on those areas that aren't high risk, where you can take some latitude and flexibility.
Another question from the audience. With identifying fear front of mind, at this moment, what is a typical fear you have in working with clients or students?
My fear in working with clients or students, um, when I see that rigidness set in, particularly with a client that is afraid of not trying to do something a little bit new, a little bit different, I can often tell when a client is fearful of the reaction of the senior leadership team if something isn't successful. We've been talking about that. And so when I see that fear come in and they just want to try to play it safe, that's a very difficult situation to be in because you've got to be able to try to coach them through that. But you know that their fear is real. They could be facing being terminated. They could be facing their project being unfunded. So navigating folks through that is both a challenge and an opportunity. But that's a tough one.
In chapter 7, you identify four archetypical types of innovation culture. Which type is the hardest to transform and why?
Well, I do think that the bureaucratic or there's the startup, there's the emerging, there's the growth, which is the sweet spot, and then there's the corporate bureaucracy. And so clearly, we've been talking about some examples during our discussion today about that corporate bureaucracy being the most difficult one to shift. And that's because the systems, the processes, the mindset, the behaviors, everything about that organism, if you will, has been designed around maturity, around playing it safe, around meeting quarter to quarter results. And so that's definitely the type of organism that is the hardest to shift and make it innovative again, which is why the best course of action is just to maintain that innovative mindset and use it to create sustainable growth for the long haul. So that's exactly what my thesis is. And companies like Ecolab or PTC Therapeutics that stay very tuned in to innovation, to the customer, to giving employees latitude, to trying new things, they don't have to worry about becoming corporate bureaucrats and then trying to unwind and remodel themselves. So don't go down that path in the first place.
So we can't leave without AI questions here. You write about both the promise and hype of AI. What's the most misunderstood aspect of AI today?
Well, I guess because I have a long view, having sat through a few other revolutions, including the digital revolution, the dot-com revolution, what I see right now is that everybody is using AI for everything. And so if we can bring AI in and bolt it on, let's do it. And even in large organizations, there are now mandates to try new things, AI budgets, we've got to get with the program, so to speak. And that is going to have to end because the fact of the matter is AI does not fit every use case and it shouldn't be forced into every situation. And so we've got to remember that it's people that identify the problems, that get to the root cause, that build solutions. And again, is the solution human engineered? Is it human plus AI engineered? Is it AI on its own? So I think that if we can get everybody to a steady state here of getting back to the origins of problem solving and really thinking about the whole armamentarium of solutions as opposed to bolting AI onto everything, we're going to calm everybody down. We'll truly get to where the value is in AI because some of the data has come out now that generative AI is actually not achieving a lot of the revenue projections that were initially established. And that's just because so many of these use cases probably don't make sense and they're not going to be with us for the long haul. So let's get back to figuring out where AI does fit. And I think that'll alleviate some of this hype and the churn.
What guardrails or principles should organizations adopt to innovate responsibly with AI?
Well, I mean, one of the first things that I think about from a governance perspective is transparency around it. And I can just give you a very simple example. At universities where I teach, we encourage students to try to improve their work with AI, get some brainstorming going, or if it's a paper, use it to help proofread it, etc. But they have to report what they've used the AI and what they've used it for. And so I think that transparency about how I'm using AI is really important because that way you can course correct, right? If you find that a student or an employee is using AI inappropriately and they're using it to, write their paper or develop the product roadmap and not as a research assistant, then we need to be able to address that to help to retrain, retool people to use AI appropriately. So I don't think that people want to use it inappropriately. I just think that because there aren't guardrails and rules, everybody can have a different approach to it. So transparency can help us to identify how people are using it and where we might need to do some training on appropriate use of it.
Last question. Can you share an example where AI transformed innovation in an unexpected way?
Well, I mean, my favorite examples, again, from a healthcare perspective, I think that AI has been absolutely transformative when it's come to cancer diagnostics. There's some really innovative companies that are able to identify tumors, literally many months before there's any physical sign of the tumor that any kind of a scan would pick up. And they're able to detect, in the blood and tissue changes that are occurring. So that's apparent in lung cancer, breast cancer, pancreatic cancer. Phenomenal work that's going on at MIT and Harvard in the area of cancer diagnostics. So I'm very, very bullish on AI in that area. I think it has a lot of promise.
Yeah, I think so as well. So I want to say thank you so much because I'm going to share this interview with my students. I think it'd be really helpful to them. And I wish you best of luck with your new book. I think it's going to do quite well, and it's so timely right now.
Yes, well, thank you, Mark. And I hope that folks that were inspired by our discussion can pre-order the book on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, bookshop.org. No Fear, No Failure. And I look forward to getting together with you in Vietnam in the not too distant future. I would love to meet your students and have an opportunity to collaborate with you.
I am only too sorry that you cannot come in December and come to our hackathon, the 20th and 21st, because I think you would add so much value to that. So maybe next year's hackathon, we get you to come out for that.
All right, let's plan on that one. Thank you, Mark. Appreciate everything that you do for innovation and business and running this show at midnight. Really appreciate it.